IB Nation. Welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. I'm Vince. That's Trevor. That is Brian. We got a packed show here for you today. And we also have some advice. Never go out to the car if you're in trouble. I'll just leave it at that. But no, we got a great show for you guys today. We're going to talk some offensive line. We're going to break it all down for you guys. And then, of course, we are going to continue with our opponent preview. And this week it is Southern Cal. They will be called by no other name but Southern Cal here on Irish Breakdown. And we are going to discuss the Trojans and what their season outlook is for the year. And so stay tuned for that. But boys, we got a good show for everybody today. How you guys doing?
I'm doing great. Ready to talk some O-line, ready to talk some USC, Southern Cal, the old Trojans.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna be a fun show. It's gonna be a fun show. I feel like the three of us haven't done a show in a while.
So the three of us, no, not since before
weeks,
my vacation.
Yeah. Well, so I'm ready to rock and roll. And we picked some pretty big topics to talk about. I mean, if you talk about how Notre Dame's season is going to be defined in 2025, the USC rivalry is going to be a big part of that. And then also, obviously, the play of the offensive line is going to be a big part of that. So, we continue to get closer and closer to the end of these breakdowns. I think this is the last one on offense. We have two more to do on defense because I had to cancel last Thursday's show, but we'll do corners and safeties the next two shows. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a fun show because this is two very, very important topics, and I think topics to get people a little fired up. So I'm ready to get after. And I was talking to, I think it was Vince before the show. I'm glad that we ended up not doing this before Charles Jagasaw's injury because the conversation would be a lot different.
Oh, yeah.
If it was just, everybody was there. Now we at least can talk about, okay, we know of an issue. We can address it and go over it. So it's going to make for a very, very intriguing conversation. No question about that.
So offensive line, guys, and this has been a very interesting group to talk about because there has been ebbs and flows with the offensive line over the last few years. Obviously, Joe Rudolph took over for a situation that, well, it had question marks. I'll just say that. There were some question marks when Joe Rudolph took over. There have been questionable outcomes, I would say, over his tenure, which leads into this being a very big year for the offensive line. And you talk about, what Notre Dame is going to do, who they are going to be this year. We know Marcus Freeman wants to be a line-driven team on offense and defense. That is going to be true this year as well. And, as we talked about the offensive line going into last year, we were talking about a very inexperienced group. I think they had 6 total starts under their belt going in. And then, of course, there was an injury in fall camp and then all kinds of question marks throughout camp as to what this offensive line was going to look like. And then they battled all those injuries and, like both sides of the ball, but the offensive line battled their share of injuries all the way through the national championship game. And now
I want to add that the players with the 6 career starts were out of the lineup by the end of game 3.
That's a very, very good point. Very good point. So very inexperienced offensive line this time last year. Now you flip the page to 2025, and now we're talking about an offensive line that's got a bunch of experience, another injury that we have to discuss, of course, and all kinds of depth. And so what does that look like going into 25? This is a big year, not only for this offensive line and what they're going to be able to do, but there's a lot hinging offensively on this offensive line because of a new quarterback, because of a not a revamped wide receiver room, but new guys and what they have in the backfield.
Yeah.
And what they could possibly do is going to hinge on the offensive line. So big year all around, not only for the play on the field, but also for Coach Rudolph.
I mean, you can't say, and we'll start with just the offensive line as a whole and the impact on the team. You can't say, hey, we're an offensive line-driven team and then have a wildly inconsistent offensive line every year.
Right.
And if you think about it, guys, I mean, when was the last time Notre Dame put a truly dominant start-to-finish offensive line on the field? And when I mean start-to-finish, I don't mean that they played elite every game. The 2017 offensive line did not play elite football in every single game. The Michigan offensive lines that won back-to-back Joe Moore awards did not play elite football in every single game. But it's more often than not, your whipping people. You're winning those battles. And you go back to like last year. There was times last year where I thought the offensive line played very well. And not even just played very well, considering, insert thing that has gone wrong this season, just flat out played well, period. There were times when they played pretty terrible. And I don't know, well, considering, because you say, well, they lost 2 starters. Well, yeah, they replaced them with 2 guys that had double-digit career starts. And then you look at 2023, and it was wildly up and down offensive line. I mean, I thought the offensive line's run blocking against Ohio State was outstanding 2 years ago. And then the next week against Duke, they couldn't get out of their own way. It was just the wildest thing ever. 2022, very similar. Start the season off struggling early in the 2022 season. Coach Easton got them rolling by the end of the year, and I thought the offensive line at the end of the year played really well, but it wasn't a full season of dominance. It was like 2/3 maybe. 2021 offensive line was arguably the worst offensive line in Notre Dame since 2007. And so you got to really go all the way back to 2020. So the last time that Notre Dame had a season where the offensive line just played at a high level all year. And I would even argue, if you go back and watch the game against Alabama, I thought Notre Dame's lines played well in that game. I thought their D-line held up. The play where Najee Harris hurdles was a Nick McLeod, right? Well, if you go back and watch that play, Jason Adamiola had blown a guard up into the backfield and forced Najee to bounce. It wasn't necessarily originally planning to be a bounce. I thought the Notre Dame offensive line handled themselves well. They got dominated at the skill positions. That's where Notre Dame got whipped. And they had like one great skill player in defense in Kyle Hamilton, and then like one great skill player in offense in Michael Mayer. But outside of that, it was like, they were good, but they weren't elite. Then the next 4 years, the skill talent takes a big jump. Now you're talking about Notre Dame's got the best corner room in the country, maybe the best secondary argument in the country, the best running back room in the country, a top 10 receiving core, a talented tight end room, a top 5 linebacker core. And we're like, are they going to be good enough in the trenches? It's just kind of wild how we've kind of seen this sort of flip. And so if Notre Dame's going to get back to playing elite football to the point where they repeat last year or go further, you can't say we're a line-driven team and then your lines aren't playing big-time football. So when you want to talk about like what's at stake, well, that right there is what's at stake. If Notre Dame wants to win a championship, I have a hard time seeing that happening if the offensive line doesn't play at a very high level and play at a high level in the big games. And last year, I think the offensive line was at times very good in big games. I thought they had some pass pro issues, but shocker, they had, faced 2 top 2 round draft picks in the first round, 2 guys who had never made a start, never played a meaningful down. Yeah, Texas A&M got some pressures, but I actually thought Anthony Knapp and Emil Wagner held their own in the opener. And I thought they run blocked very well. And then you fast forward to the Louisville game, and it was one of the worst offensive line performances that we've seen in a couple years. And then there's other games they played very well, and other games they didn't play very well. Get to the postseason, got some ups and downs. There were some times they played well, sometimes they didn't. There just needs to be a level of consistency now with the offensive line that they've got to, the floor's got to be here, and they need more of the dominant performances here. And that's, they don't need to be 2017. I'll say this, what made the 2020 O-line so good, it wasn't nearly as dominant as the 2017 O-line. It wasn't nearly as dominant as the 2015 O-line. But what made that line so good is they just did their job and just played good football week after week after week after week. There's a couple games that I thought, man, they were just crushing people. But when like Liam Eichenberg does not have a highlight tape nearly as impressive as Joe Alt or Ronnie Stanley or Mike McGlinchey. But if you go back and watch Liam Eichenberg play, what made him a first-team All-American that year was he just did his job. He just won snap after snap after snap. And he's not blowing guys 8 yards off the ball. He's just, I won here, you got blocked. I won here, you got blocked. Robert Hainsey did that. Aaron Banks did that. Jarrett Patterson did that. Tommy Kramer did that until he got injured. And if it wasn't until the injuries that set in late in the year, Jarrett Patterson got hurt, and Tommy Kramer was banged up, and then Zeke Correll got hurt, and it was banged up going into the postseason. But up until that point, the line was just steady. That's what they need this year. Just do your job week after week. You'll mix in a couple, dominant performances, but just get a body on a body. And if you do that, the skill talent on this team is going to be excellent and is going to dominate. And if you don't do that, then this team is going to be inconsistent on offense once again, because you do not have – well, I was going to say you don't have number 13 behind center, but you will have possibly a number 13 behind center. You won't have Leonard more bailing you out.
Right.
You let a guy run through and he just spins out of it or breaks a tackle or whatever and turns a potential sack. Like, if you think about the first drive against A&M, gives up a free rusher, Riley spins out of it, takes off running, gets into A&M territory, then slides, gets hit, 15-yard penalty. That's a sack this year, most likely, even with Kenny Minchie at quarterback. You don't have the quarterback to bail you out anymore. And so this line's going to have to play at a high level if this team is going to play for championship. And the expectation is, okay, you are inconsistent, injuries and youth and all that. We go into 2025, Trev, and you've got experience now. You've got over 50 career starts, 53 career starts coming back. You've got incredible depth coming back. You're bigger than you were last year. You're more athletic than you were last year. You're going into year 3 of your offensive line coaching aspects. The expectation is this offensive line should be really good. Look at every single preseason magazine has them top 5, except I think PFS the only one that have them top 5. Some have them number 1, some have them number 3, and your expectations are just going to be through the roof. Which, Trev, I think I'll kick it to you. That puts a lot of pressure on the offensive line coach to say, okay, the talent's there, no more excuses. It's time for you to prove that you are one of the best O-line coaches in the country, not just a good one.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure on Joe Rudolph this fall. You can make the argument that the talent has been there since he got here. I mean, his first season as Notre Dame's offensive line coach, he had 2 high NFL draft picks at tackle. Now, you could argue that the talent is more consistent across the board, but he's always had talent on the offensive line. Now it's time to put it together. All of the projection that we've talked about for this offense, 2 1,000-yard running backs and C.J. Carr, Kenny throwing for over 3,000 yards and having a 1,000-yard receiver and Eli Raridon breaking out, it all starts up front. And that stuff can't happen unless Joe Rudolph gets his guys together. In year 1, they flashed. But the issue in 2023 was there were just games where they didn't look like they wanted to be there. You're not going to convince me that all 5 of the guys on the offensive line wanted to be down at Duke playing that game. You just won't convince me. You're not going to convince me that they wanted to play against Louisville. Will not. One of the worst offensive line performances that I had seen since the 2021 game was that 2023 Louisville game. But then against USC, they show up. They showed up against Ohio State, so it was a lot of that. That issue was solved for the most part last season, in that there's not a game that I point back to where I look at it and say, yeah, as a unit, they just didn't look like they wanted to be there.
Like, even when they played poorly,
yep,
they competed.
Exactly.
The Louisville game was not a lack of, they just didn't want to be there. That's a great point, Trev. There was never a moment where you're like, did these guys even have a clue what they were doing? Did they even want to be there? Like, they play with no fire, no effort. That's a great point. It's a great point.
It always looked like they wanted to be there. They understood what their job was, but it was just the experience bug. By the Louisville game, they'd already, going back to fall camp, they switched up their lineup like 3 times, and you're at game 5. Now you come into this season, you have a lot more experience. I know the Jagasaw injury stings, but he had the least amount of career starts of the 5 potential starting offensive linemen. We're talking about a guy who had 2 career starts, played in 2.5 games. And only one of those games, he played at the position he was slated to start in. So it stings, but there is a lot of promise left between Knapp and Schrouth and Craig coming back. And then their most veteran starter from last season in Emil Wagner, who started and played in all 16 games. But Joe Rudolph has to get them to play more cohesively a unit. And we're going to dive into the rest of the segment, what that looks like, what are the specific areas. But big picture, Joe Rudolph is going to have to find a way to get these guys to play at a very consistent level for 14, 15, maybe 16 games.
Joe Rudolph has kind of been an anomaly for me since he's been here. It's like I can't put my finger on it. There's people that really dislike Joe Rudolph. There's people that really like Joe Rudolph. And I find myself someplace in the middle. Like I haven't really – I don't have a direct opinion yet. I guarantee you I will after this year is over.
Yeah.
I think that's where I'm at with Joe Rudolph, right? Because he inherited talent, right? He inherited some talent. He has recruited well. I think that he has kind of carried on the moniker of O-line U at Notre Dame. We've been very happy with the overall recruits that he's bringing in. Now these are his guys. We are officially, in my opinion, we are where we need to be as analysts to really analyze who Joe Rudolph is as a coach, not only as a recruiter, but also as an on-the-field coach. I completely agree with Trevor in that these guys have always competed when they've been on the field for Joe Rudolph. No doubt about it.
Last year.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, he was the O-line coach in 2023. That's fair. My only, yeah.
And those weren't his guys,
but that's part of progress, though.
Right.
To your point, it's like you had this unit that didn't show up every week in year one.
Right.
And for all the issues we had with him in year two, his kids came to at least emotionally and physically came to play every week.
And it showed that he did a good job in bringing these kids to campus because there was a lot of young guys that were called upon in very tough situations and they came to play. And so I think that, if we're checking boxes, right? Like I think that's a box to check. This is a big year. This is a very, very big year for Joe Rudolph because now it's going to be, okay, this is year 3. We always analyze what a head coach does in year 3. This is an opportunity to see what Joe Rudolph is going to do in year 3. And there's not a whole lot of excuses to go around if things don't go the way they should go. Now, if there's a rash of injuries and things like that, we can have that conversation. But you've got an All-America backfield behind you. You've got a kid who can, whether it's Kenny or whether it's CJ, you got a kid back there who's going to be able to sling the rock. So what's the pass pro going to look like? We've never really had issues with the run blocking, some Simon issues, but what's the pass pro going to look like? I think that's going to be key because the pass pro last year, we didn't have to necessarily see beautiful pockets every time because of who you had at quarterback, right?
Would have been nice.
Agreed. But this is a different kind of quarterback now. Pass pro becomes even more important, I believe, this year and then moving forward, right? And so there's not a lot of excuses to go around. These guys need to show up and they need to prove that they can do what they do. And that all goes back to Joe Rudolph. So this is a big year for Joe.
And look, part of coaching is showing progress from year to year. And that's what the hope is for Joe Rudolph is, last year at this time, we were asking, are they even going to show up to play every week? I mean, that was a legitimate question. Well, that got answered. In 16 games, that got answered. You guys, I could point to 5, 6, 7 games where I don't think the offensive line played very well. But to Trevor's point, they never didn't show up to battle. And part of that's the player leadership, but part of that is especially a coaching leadership, especially for such a young unit. You can't be like, well, they had a fifth-year senior leader. Okay, those guys eventually stepped into the lineup, but they started the season on the bench. And so that's progress. I thought the run blocking improved, technical improvement, effort improvement. There's still things I want to see them. I want to see them use their hands a little bit better. They can still use their feet a little bit better. I thought when the competition got tougher at the end in the playoffs, I thought they reverted to some bad habits. Hopefully this unit won't make those mistakes. But the big thing is going to be, can Joe Rudolph do for the pass game what he did last year for the run game? I think that's a big thing for me. And I'll give you guys some numbers, okay? So this is PFF data. In 2020, under Jeff Quinn, Notre Dame gave up 9.2 pressures per game. In 2021, under Jeff Quinn, Notre Dame gave up 8.4 pressures per game. In 2022, under Harry Hiestand, Notre Dame gave up 5.6 pressures per game. In 2023, under Joe Rudolph, with basically the same offensive line you had the year before, you gave up 7.7 pressures per game. And then this year, you gave up 7.5 pressures per game. So basically the same number that you gave up the year before. So we didn't see improvement. Now, you could say, well, there kind of was some improvement. And I think this is a fair thing to say because you gave up the same number without Joe Alt and Blake Fisher. So there was some level of growth, but a lot of that growth came from the inside. And a lot of that growth came from the fact that you replaced Billy Schrauth, or you replaced Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler for Billy Schrauth. In 2023, Pat Coogan gave up 25 pressures. Rocco Spindler gave up 15. Zeke Correll gave up 10. In 2024, Billy Schrauth, who played 12 games, gave up 8 pressures. Rocco, who played 14 games, was down to 10. And then Pat Coogan, who played 14 games, was down to 8. Dramatic improvement from your interior guys. Dramatic improvement. Your issues were a lot at tackle. And so obviously it was kind of the reverse of what it was the year before, where your left tackle was elite, your right tackle was dominant at times and inconsistent at other times, but your interior was pretty bad in pass pro, with the exception of Zeke Correll, who I thought had like one bad game in pass pro against Duke and then was solid after that. So the numbers don't lie that you've got to get better. I mean, it's a fact. You've got to get better at protecting the quarterback, because I would contend those numbers. So like if you look at like the number of sacks plus hits, it was 30 compared to like 40 the year before. A lot of that had to do with who your quarterback was. In 2022, with Drew Pine a quarterback for most of the year and Tyler Buckner, you only gave up 26 pressures or 26 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. So, you gave up 36 in 2021. In 2020, you gave up 23. So again, you still have a lot of room for improvement when it comes to protecting the quarterback. And I would argue that you could have probably added 5 to 10 more hits plus sacks on the quarterback if you didn't have Riley Leonard at quarterback. And so I think that's going to be a big key, and that's going to be the big test for Joe Rudolph. And then the other part is, can you put the right people on the field? And I know that there's the defenders. There's people that just feel like I have to push back when someone's being attacked. And I understand that, and that's fair. But no honest observer can look at what happened the last 2 years when guys were put on the field because of injury, and then you just immediately see improvement. You can't tell me that that's a coincidence when it happened 2 years in a row. You can't go back to 2023 and say, well, I got mad at IB people for complaining all year about Billy Schrauth not playing, and then ignore the fact that this offense averaged over 250 yards rushing in the last 3 games once Billy Schrauth and Ashton Craig were put in the field. You can't then go look at last year and say, well, I'm not sure if I agree with the decisions that were made, and then watch what happened once Rocco was back in the lineup, and then see again what happened once Rocco and Billy were together in the lineup. All of a sudden, Anthony Knapp's game takes off. Is that a coincidence? Maybe. But there's way too many coincidences with the offensive line the last couple of years for me to believe that it wasn't a decision that was a mistake when you look at who they put on the field. And so, I've brought this stat up again. I'm going to say it again. In the last 2 years, Billy Schrauth has played in 15 games, and he's not played in 14 games. Guys, that's almost a 50-50 split. And 4 of the games he played in were playoff games against Indiana, Georgia, Penn State, and Ohio State. Just keep that in mind. In the 15 games where Billy Schrauth has played, Notre Dame has averaged 212.3 rushing yards per game and 5.8 yards per carry. In the 14 games without him in the lineup, they're at 174.6 and 5.1 yards per carry. That's not a coincidence. And so you look back and say, well, what would have the 2023 season looked like if they would have let him kind of be out there at the beginning? So I think those are all things. And it's not even to say who I think should be out there. That's not the point. To a degree, we have to have some faith in the coaches that are seeing these kids every day. And so I don't want to get into a move Knapp or move that. I don't care who starts where. They just need to make sure they get their best 5-man rotation out there this year, which they have not done to start the season each of the last 2 years. And so I think that's the pressure on Coach Rudolph this year. And now that he's in year 3, your expectation is that now we're going to truly get a sense of who he is as a developer, and can he coach like he can recruit? I think that's sort of the big question. And so how well that question gets answered, and I'm not saying he won't do those things. I'm not saying he won't improve pass pro. I'm not saying he won't put the right people on the field. I'm saying no one being honest can look at what's happened the last 2 years and say, oh, yeah, they've made the perfect personnel decisions every single time on the offensive line. You can't. You can't. You can't look at how Rocco Spindler played once he stepped into the lineup compared to how Sam Pendleton played and be like, yeah, they made the right decision. You can't. You can't tell me that. But that's in the past. Every coach makes those type of mistakes. Every single one makes those kind of mistakes. It's okay, let's improve, let's get better, and let's make sure we're doing it now. You can't redo last year. You just make sure you get it right this year. And if he does that, I'm a lot more confident this offensive line is going to be what we all hope it's going to be, even with the injury that we've already seen. Can't sustain a whole lot more, but I think you're at least in a position where you can overcome one, maybe two, and still be pretty good.
Yeah. So Trev, we've talked about kind of how important this offensive line is, and people keep calling me. We've talked about how important the offensive line is and what it means.
It's a Joe Rudolph supporter.
To this, yeah, right. It was a number that I don't recognize, so it very well could be that.
Might have been Joe Rudolph. You guys need to freaking lay off me, man. Get off my back. What did I ever do to you? Nothing, right? Coach. We love you. We think you can be great. We're just holding you to that standard. That's what it is.
Fantastic. So anyway, look, Notre Dame fans, Notre Dame the program, they have national championship aspirations, right? I mean, they just went to a national championship game last year. Graduate players, et cetera, right? We're talking on the field. So, in your opinion, if that is the goal, what does this offensive line look like in order to make that happen?
First for it, Trev, kick us off. I'm sorry, I just saw somebody's comments.
They gotta.
Somebody said, Andrew, why are you calling Vince? Sorry.
No, I saw that too. That's funny. I mean, first and foremost, they got to stay healthy. It's really, really hard to put a championship caliber group together when you have to switch up your lineup every 3 games due to an injury. Health is going to be key. If you can maintain all 5 guys on the field relatively, like, look, if somebody gets a rolled ankle and has to miss a game here or there, that's just football. I mean, the national champions last year in Ohio State switched up their starting lineup.
Yeah.
I mean,
their title game offensive line looked nothing like the line they had in the first half of the season, right?
Yeah,
that's what's you get some of those excuses people want to make. I'm like, well, it didn't stop Ohio State from working Notre Dame in the championship game because they were missing their first round draft pick at left tackle. They were missing their All-American center. Like, didn't stop them.
Kicked a guard out to left tackle. I mean, all these other things. And to put some numbers behind it, I mean, Notre Dame, despite having Riley Leonard and his sack evading prowess last season under center, Notre Dame still ranked 62nd in the country in sacks allowed. Ohio State ranked 20th, and they also had offensive line issues of their own. That's why it has to improve. When we say Notre Dame's offensive line has to improve in pass protection, that doesn't mean they have to go from 62nd to the number 1 team in the country in sacks allowed. Wouldn't hurt. I wouldn't be upset if that happened. But at the end of the day, it's just that's the type of improvement that needs to happen. Notre Dame can't do what they want to do on offense. Mike Denbrock can't call the plays that he wants to on offense with a quarterback that can make, second, third level reads, that can really process a defense. Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price can't have the seasons that they want to unless the offensive line plays at a consistent level every single week. And if they don't do that, it's going to be a lot of the same conversation we had last year. If the offensive line can hold up and if they can stay healthy, then they got a shot. But they're really going to have to put it together week over week.
Well, I think that's a great point. And I think also, guys, when you look at it as an offensive coordinator, I've called plays. Vince, you've called plays. Trev, you've called plays in NCAA 2026. If you don't know what you're going to get from the offensive line, I'm sorry, we were kind of busting each other's chops before the show. Sorry,
no, that's funny.
Continuation of it.
That's good stuff.
If you don't know what you're going to get from your offensive line week to week, it makes it really hard to put a game plan together because you say, hey, look, I think this is going to work, and then the stuff you call isn't like
yeah. There's a reason when I was an offensive coordinator and I didn't have a position, I hung out at the offensive line primarily during practice, like during indie time and all of that, because if you don't have those guys right, you're not really going to be able to do anything else. So that was foundationally where you need to be offensively. So anyway, continue, sir.
So no, I just think that's a big thing is there needs to be I don't even need this line to be 2017 dominant and 2015 dominant. I really don't. I just need this line to be consistent. Mike Denbrock needs this line to be consistent. Like, I got to know what the floor of your performance is week after week. Because if you're a play caller and you go in a game and your offensive line is just working the other team, it's a lot easier to adjust on the fly because you can just lean into some stuff and be like, look, they haven't stopped duo all game. Like Tommy Rees did that in 2022 against Clemson. It was brilliant. He just was like, look, they can't stop duo. So we're just going to run duo about 7 different ways and just work them. He leaned into it. I don't know that Tommy Rees's game plan going in was, hey, let's just run duo all game. I don't know that was the game plan. I think what happened is at the beginning, he's like, dude, they're just lining up in their base defense and not moving with our motion. And our guys are blocking the heck out of duo. So let's just lean into it and dominate. That's a lot easier to do than we spent all week trying to run duo and we can't block it. And now what do we do? You know what I mean? Like, where do we go from here? I think there's got to be a baseline. And if the baseline can be here, then you'll get your occasional dominant performances. And that's when you really put a team away. And so I think that's the thing I'm excited about because, like, last year's line, to me, the line play wasn't good enough. Like, just flat out, it wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough through the season. It wasn't good enough in the postseason. The offensive line did not play good enough against Penn State. It did not play good enough against Georgia, and it did not play good enough against Ohio State. I actually think it held up pretty well against Indiana. When you consider Indiana was throwing the kitchen sink at Notre Dame from a run-stopping standpoint, and Notre Dame still ripped off a 98-yard run and then followed that up with a 16-play drive to go up 14-0, and Indiana's not scoring 14 on your defense in meaningful situations. Then the next 3 games, they struggled. And so you got to be able to say it wasn't good enough. It's got to be better, but then also be excited about the fact that you were going into last year with brand new tackles. You were going into last year with a brand new left guard. You did lose your starting center to a season-ending injury. You did miss your best guard for 4 games in the season. You did lose Anthony Knapp, in the beginning of the game, and you did lose Rocco Spindler. And then Rocco got hurt against Indiana also and wasn't the same player for the next 2 games and got hurt again, obviously, against Penn State. So even in the playoffs, you didn't get the best version of your line health-wise. Those are all explanations why the offensive line didn't play well, but there was also explanations why they didn't play well in 2023. You're in year 3. You've recruited well. You've got experience. You've got talent. You got depth. You got size. The excuses are done. Like, that's the thing is it's not saying that they won't play well. It's just saying, like, this is where you are. The excuses are done. There are no more excuses for why you can or can't do something. And that's the part that's kind of the pitch is like, this is what's expected. But the other part of it is, but that's also what I'm excited about because you do have a very talented and now experienced offensive line coming back. I think that the depth is more established this year than it was last year, where last year you were turning into redshirt freshmen and true freshmen when there's injuries. Now, the only way you're turning to a true freshman on the offensive line is if you're just like, this Will Black kid's too good not to play. Like, that's the only reason you're playing a true freshman, barring just utter catastrophe. You don't have to go to a freshman. Last year, if you lost your starting left tackle, your next 2 tackles were literally true freshmen. And well, I don't know if they should have played Anthony Knapp. He was a true freshman. Well, the other option was Gerby Lambert, who was a true freshman and wasn't an early enrollee. Like, that's where you were. Oh, okay. You don't like those options? How about Styles Prescott, who's also a true freshman? Because they had already decided they didn't trust Tosh Baker as a full-time starter. That's what they had decided. And so, you did now it's your least experienced guy now is Sullivan Absher, who's going to his junior season. And your next least experienced guy is now Ashton Craig, who's going into his senior season. And he's got 6 career starts under his belt. So I just look at it and say, I love the talent. I love the depth. The experience is much better than – it's not like elite experience. We have something like 100 starts going into 2020 or something like that. It was like it's crazy number of starts going into 2020. Now you're closer to you're not there, but you're closer to it than you were last year and you had 6. You know what I mean? And so that's also why I'm excited about this line, because I do think that Joe Rudolph is going to make a jump. And the reason I'm confident in that is because of what we saw last year. Because even with all the issues, we saw a very important part of the offense, of the line play that was pretty bad and mediocre in year one. Bad's not. It was very mediocre in year one, very inconsistent in year one. Was pretty darn good in year two, despite the fact every week the other team knew they were going to do that, and that's running the football. So now my thing is, okay, they had to focus on getting better there last year. Now the hope is they can get better protecting the quarterback. And I'll be honest, I thought the first-team offensive line did a pretty good job protecting the quarterback in the blue gold game. Now, we saw very little Josh Burnham. We saw no Boo Bakar. We saw no Jordan Patojo. We saw very little Junior Chilamaka. That might have played a part in it, but it's at least a good sign that in the blue gold game, I thought they performed pretty well in pass pro when the first team unit was together. There were some times when the backup unit didn't look so good, but that's to be expected in the spring. So I know we talked a lot about this needs to get better, but that's what I'm excited about, because I do have hope, and I do expect it to get better this year. And I think that we're gonna have a much more consensus view of Joe Rudolph by the end of this year. And I think we're all going to come to the conclusion that no matter what you may think, we all have to agree that he's at least a good offensive line coach. There may be still debate. Is he Harry? Is he this? Is he that? That's always going to be up for debate. They could win the Joe Moore Award this year, and it's going to still be up for debate. But at least we can say, hey, look, he's a good offensive line coach. And that's what that's what we need to be able to look back at the end of the year and say, Notre Dame's got a good offensive line coach. They've got one of the 10 to 12 best offensive line coaches in college football. Because if they got that, they're going to be fine, because the one thing he can do is bring in talent. You give me a top 10 O-line coach with the talent that Notre Dame has, they're going to be pretty flipping good. And that's what has me excited about the year.
So let's talk about what this team this offensive line, this position group has lost from last year. And there was a significant amount of starts that are now going to be suiting up for different teams, via the transfer portal and all of that. So, Trevor, I will throw it to you to kind of run down what they've lost, where they've gone, what that means to this offensive line. And then we'll kind of go into the depth chart that remains and what that kind of looks like. And then we'll, go on from there. So I'll let you kind of start with the players that have left Notre Dame that still had, availability and, eligibility and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, the biggest thing that they lost up front was a lot of very, very key depth pieces. And we saw that last season. We saw Pat Coogan step in. We saw Rocco Spindler step in, finish the rest of the season at center and right guard. Losing Sam Pendleton hurts. Unfortunately for him, I think he was thrust in the starting lineup before he was ready, because I think he would have been a very good interior offensive lineman for Notre Dame if he was given more time to mature and grow as a player. But unfortunately, he's moved on to Tennessee, and that situation is what it is. Losing Pat Coogan, you lose the, kind of like the rah-rah leader of the group. You got, he's the fifth-year veteran. He was the one that got everybody juiced up before the games, and you need those people in the room. Very curious to see who steps up amongst those guys this year, because right now the room kind of seems to me like it's a lot of like individual leaders, I guess you could say. I'm not saying that they have to have some viral, immaculate pregame speech every single week, but I'm going to be interested to see who kind of steps up into that role of what Pat Coogan had. And then in Rocco Spindler, you lost, arguably one of the best backup offensive linemen in the entire country. What he was able to step in and do. And now with the injury to Charles Jagusah,
he should have been a starter, though. That's the whole point.
Absolutely.
Rocco shouldn't have been a backup.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this year, it would have been a situation where I think there was more warranted for him to be a backup this season, opposed to last. And you lost a really quality depth piece in Rocco Spindler, and now you sit there and play the what-if game of, would Notre Dame still have this many question marks given the injury at right guard if you still had the kid on campus who started at right guard for you the entire postseason and is now healthy? And so, it is a what-if, but that ultimately that's what they lost. But they moved on to other schools and other opportunities because of what was behind them, because of that talent.
Yep.
And that's where you feel comfortable with it.
Right.
Now, of course, given the situation, you wish one of Pat Coogan or Rocco Spindler would have stayed. I know they were both would have been welcomed back if they would have elected to return to South Bend.
But also understand why both of them left.
Absolutely.
Because especially Rocco, like you could tell him, hey, you're going to get a chance to start all you want. But he's like, after what happened last fall camp, why would I believe that you're going to give me a legitimate chance to start?
Well, exactly. And
I don't blame either one of them. Yeah, I mean, no. I don't blame either one of them.
Well, last season
and I'm also okay with them leaving for both sides, by the way.
Yeah. Also. Yeah, 100%. Last season was their season where it's you put the team first. You did what was asked of you. You started the season on the bench. You came in after, right in the middle of your third game of the season, and then you answered the bell every single week. At some point in your career, it is okay to kind of put your needs first, especially if you did everything else before it correctly. And so that's the main three pieces that they lost on offense. They also lost Ty Chan, another depth piece. But at the end of the day, losing Pendleton, Coogan, and Spindler were kind of their three biggest hits along the offensive line in terms of what they lost from last year.
No question. Losing a guy with 8 career snaps is not going to hurt your depth on the offensive line. As a junior, he had 8 career snaps on the offensive line. So, look, they had to move on. That was what was best for them. If they have, they who knows if they're going to have NFL careers. This could be their last chance to play football. I'm fine with it. You say, well, man, if they wouldn't have left with Jagasol being hurt, Rocco probably start. He probably does. But then what do you do when Jagasol comes back? And or at least now at Nebraska, you're going to get this last chance to play. In Indiana, Pat knows he's going to get his last chance to play. Some things that I was told about how the things went with Sam Pendleton last year and communication issues and stuff, I totally understand him leaving too. At the same time, yes, they lost some players, but to your point, Trevor, is they lost those guys because they were going to have to battle just to keep, spots that they had. Sullivan Absher was not going to just accept being behind Rocco Spindler and Pat Coogan and Sam Pendleton. He was not. Sullivan Absher was going to come into this season and battle to beat those guys out. It's not a given. They would have been even – forget holding off Charles Jagus on Billy Shrout. That wasn't going to happen. Those two guys were going to start. Were you going to be able to hold off Sullivan Absher? And I think that's the thing I love about this depth chart, guys, is we kind of transition to that. And I'll just go ahead and bring it up. But even with those losses, this is still a talented depth chart. Look, Charles Jagasol is out of the equation. So you still have Anthony Knapp, Billy Strouth, Ashton Craig, and Emil Wagner starters. Okay. Sullivan Absher, in my grading system, was a borderline top 100 recruit that had very high upside. And the only reason he wasn't a top 100 recruit is because I'd never seen him really pass block because he played in a triple option offense that we never really got a chance to see him do much real pass pro. And so that was always a bit of a lesson that he needed to learn. I've said this about Joe Rudolph's, how he's used Sullivan Absher. I think it's been a mistake that they've never allowed Sullivan Absher to play one position. And they should have let him learn one position. But why did he do that? Is he just some big dumb coach that doesn't know what he's doing? No, it's because he had a lot of faith in Sullivan Absher and said, I got to find a place for this kid to play. So in some regards, you're like, dude, I don't like what you did. But in other regards, you're like, I get it because you're doing it because you feel like this kid is too good not to be able to help us. And we got to coach him up and get him ready to play. Where can this kid help us? Why are you trying to teach him to be a jack of all trades before the Jagasol injury? Because he's our next best lineman. And I want to be able to put him in wherever we might have a need. So in some ways, you're like, I don't like it. I think it hurts development. But then other ways, you're like, but I understand it. Because you've recognized Sullivan is a very talented player, and you got to try to find a way to get him in there. You look at the two deep. Joe Otting's a good football player. Styles Prescott had a nice spring. Gerby Lambert is a guy that we think could be a potential star. You've got Christopher Tarrant, who has got some health issues, but when he's been healthy, he's been a pretty good football player. And so I like, and then of course you've got your freshman class that has Will Black, who I think could be your next best guy. There's a scenario where if there's another injury inside, and Will Black is the player that we think he's going to be. And I've heard some things, and we had our guy Dylan had a little intel on the board, and I've heard some things from my sources. I haven't put my intel piece out, but I've heard some things that Will Black is athletically everything that they thought he was going to be. Is Peter Jones right? It may not even have to come to that. Well, what if Christopher? It's just okay. Someone inside gets hurt. You move Anthony Knapp inside, and now Will Black steps in left tackle. The point is, there's a lot of talent in this lineup still. There's a lot of depth. There's good size, especially inside. I mean, the inside of offensive line, Billy Strouth is your smallest guy at 305. Everybody else is 311 or bigger. You've got plenty of size. You've got plenty of athleticism at tackle. So there's no – I mean, you could say you could move Gerby Lambert inside if there's an injury. There's plenty of talent, even with Jagasol being out. And then we expect Jagasol to be back at some point in time this season. Now, can he stay healthy once he comes back? Very good question. None of us knows the answer to that. But even with all that, guys, I still love this depth chart. There's still a lot of talent on this offensive line. There's a lot of experience on this offensive line. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing how this unit develops.
What gets me the most excited about this group is there's a chance that they don't hit their ceiling this season, play extremely well, and every single one of them can come back. Every single one. I mean, you go through and you look at what everybody's eligibility is. Most players on this depth chart, with the exception of Emil Wagner and I believe Ashton Craig, can come back for multiple years.
All of them can come back for 2 years.
Which is wild.
You only have 3 guys on this depth chart that have junior eligibility. Mm-hmm. It's Strouth, Craig, and Wagner.
Absolutely crazy. I mean, the youth, and then, of course, what they have coming in the 2026 class. And so the depth in this room is undeniable. They just have to put it together, and we got to see it. That's going to be the biggest key for them. But the size is off the charts. The athleticism is off the charts. The depth is off the charts. And so if they're able to piece together a consistent season, like we've been saying, this is going to be a really, really good unit.
Yeah. No question. The size is there, the talent there, athleticism, all of it's there for this to be a really good offensive line. It is, but the thing is, it is still young. I mean, that's the wild thing is it's a lot more experience. It's still young. And you start thinking about what this line could look like in 2026, like you said, Trev, there's a lot coming back. And then, of course, they're going to add next year's and they're going to lose some guys this offseason. They're not going to bring all these guys back. You can't. I mean, this is what are we looking at here? This is 16 offensive linemen, plus you're adding 6 more next year.
Yeah.
You're going to lose some guys. That's part of life. That's part of the current reality of college football. But like if Charles Jagasol, let's just say Charles Jagasol, I said this the other day, let's say Charles Jagasol decided he won't play football anymore right after the season last year. You still lost Rocco, you still lost Coogan, you still lost Sam Pendleton. And we're going into the whole offseason thinking Sylvan Absher is going to be the right guard for Notre Dame. I'm not worried about the offensive line.
No.
Is Sylvan Absher as good as Charles Jagasol? I don't think so. But that's because I think Charles Jagasol has elite first-round talent. If Sylvan Absher has to be your starting right guard for whatever reason, and we knew that a whole offseason, I'm still like, boy, I can't wait to see what Sully's going to do this year. Because we've really only seen him play extended periods of time just a couple times in his career. And I thought he held his own both times. We saw him play at the end of we saw him play some against Oregon State in 2023. And do you guys remember how that offensive line, in that one drive, just went right down the field on Oregon State, and Sully was playing left tackle in that game. This is a kid that played 90 snaps, 23 at left tackle against Purdue, 35 at left guard, played 21 snaps against Stanford at left guard, had 6 snaps at right guard against Navy, and then had 24 snaps at right tackle. He literally played everywhere but center last year. And guess what they were doing with him this spring? Playing him at center. You know what I mean? I think him being able to hopefully settle in at one position, I think is going to be really good for Sylvan Absher. And that's why the injury to Charles Jagasol is unfortunate. Having said that, barring it happening in the spring where he'd even have more time to heal, it did come at a pretty decent time for Notre Dame because you now have the next few weeks and all of fall camp to hone in on here's who's going to get that shot at right guard. And it won't just be Absher. Absher has to win the job. That's just kind of where it is for now. But maybe it's Gerby Lambert that says, hey, I'm too good not to play. Maybe it's Christopher Tarrick. Maybe it's Joe Wadding. Maybe it's somebody else. But the point is, I think Sylvan Absher getting a chance to just hopefully, and we don't know that he's going to definitely do this. This is what we're assuming. But I think if they just let him play right guard, just look, dude, from now until Jagasol comes back, you're playing right guard. I think his game has a chance to really take off. It really does. And if it doesn't, then they've got to come up with some questions. But I think that's going to be a big key, and it's going to help solidify this whole thing.
All right, that's going to do it for our kind of overview on the offensive line. So make sure you stick with us. We got a lot more to talk about. But in the meantime, make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends, and, of course, jump on the boards@irishbreakdown.com. All kinds of great content over there. It's where you want to be. Again, one more domino to fall in the recruiting world, and you'll probably want to check out where you want to check out the boards to kind of know maybe where that's headed, and maybe not. I don't know. We'll see. That's where the intel comes from, guys, and that's what you need to check out. So you definitely want to get over to boards.irishbreakdown.com.